In May, Spanish police received a disturbing call from a quiet neighborhood in Malaga. The body of a young woman with multiple stab wounds was found in an apartment. The suspect vanished but was arrested a few hours later in a nearby cafe. This tragedy, however, is only the beginning of a chain of events that leads investigators to a case that has been unsolved for 9 years. Behind the wall of one of the apartments, something is hidden that shocks even the most experienced forensic investigators. In 2011, Sibora Gagani lived with her boyfriend Marco Romeo in the Spanish neighborhood of Lora. At first glance, their life seemed stable. Sibora had a job as a waitress in a local restaurant and Marco worked as a chef. They rented a small house and Sibora regularly called her mother Elisabetha, assuring her that she was fine. Behind this facade of apparent well-being, however, serious problems were hidden, becoming more apparent with each passing month. When Elisabetha traveled to Spain to visit her daughter, she immediately noticed the tense atmosphere in the house. Even in her presence, arguments broke out between Sibora and Marco. Elisabetha saw how her daughter tried to justify the outbursts of jealousy and tension as temporary difficulties. The mother, however, was sure that these were not just domestic problems. It was hard to believe that Sibora was a completely different person just 2 years earlier. She was born on September 14, 1991 in Tirana, Albania, and had been a cheerful person since childhood. After her parents' divorce, her mother Elizabeth moved with the children to Italy, where they started a new life. In Rome, Sibora quickly won the sympathy of others. Her nickname Chibai, given to her by her classmates, highlighted her vivacity and joy for life. Despite financial hardship, Sibora was eager to contribute to her family's upkeep from an early age. She took a job as a waitress in a local restaurant but never gave up on her dreams. Her natural beauty, slender figure, and winning a regional beauty pageant opened the way for her into the world of fashion. But despite her success, her biggest dream was to work as a teacher because Sibora loved children above all else. The change began when Sibora turned 18. In a cafe, she met Marco, a 30-year-old man whose charm and confidence immediately attracted her. When she met him, Sibora knew little about him. He was divorced, had a sister, and seemed focused on starting a new life. This appearance, however, concealed his complicated past. Marco was known for his aggressive temperament and problems with illegal substances, which had brought him to the attention of the police more than once. Sibora, fascinated by his charisma, paid no attention to this. After a year of relationship, Marco suggested that Sibora move to Spain as there were not enough job opportunities in Italy. Elisabetha tried to dissuade her daughter, doubting the sincerity of Marco's intentions, but Sibora insisted. She believed that this step would be the beginning of a new chapter in which she and Marco could build a happy life. In Spain, things initially looked promising. Sibora quickly found a job as a waitress, and Marco got a job as a pizzaiolo. They rented a cozy house and Sibora told her mother about her plans, but the stability was short-lived. Marco lost one job after another and blamed his employers. His irritability and jealousy became increasingly evident. He showed increasingly aggressive behavior, initially in small things that gradually escalated into serious problems. Elizabeth, who had traveled to Spain to see for herself how her daughter was living, was shocked by what she saw. Sibora, who had always been cheerful and confident, now seemed depressed. Marco did not hide his irritability even in her mother's presence. The arguments grew louder, and Sibora continued to defend Marco despite the obvious problems, assuring her mother that everything would get better. What exactly led Sibora to ignore the warning signs was a mystery to her loved ones. She probably sought in Marco the support and stability that she lacked in her youth. The family, who had moved from Albania to Italy, went through difficult times. Elisabetha worked hard to give her children a chance at a better life, but Sibora was confronted with the need to take responsibility early on. Her relationship with Marco may have been an attempt to fill this void, but instead it led to even more tension. In July 2014, Sibora Gagani suddenly disappeared, leaving her family worried. The last time she exchanged messages with Marco, her former partner, was on July 7. After that, her phone was switched off and all social media accounts were inactive. This was strange and untypical behavior for her. Sibora had previously told her mother that she had finally ended her relationship with Marco, moved into a new apartment, and felt free. She even described her feelings as being like a butterfly just emerging from its cocoon. But her sudden silence made everyone take notice. The situation began to take an even stranger turn when Marco suddenly appeared at her mother's house in Italy. He tried to give the impression of a worried man who was sorry about what had happened. Over a cup of coffee, he told Elizabeth that he didn't understand where Sibora had gone. He said they had argued before she disappeared, and she had left, leaving all her belongings behind. Later, he changed his version, saying that a security guard in their residential complex had allegedly seen Sibora leaving with 2 suitcases. These contradictory statements raised doubts and increased the unrest. Elizabeth remembered that Sibora had told her a month earlier about her decision to end the relationship. After 3 years of trying to save the relationship, she had moved out of Marco's house and begun to rebuild her life. Sibora tried to keep her distance from her former partner, but this apparently did not deter him. Marco continued to take an active interest in her life. In early July, he called Elizabeth out of the blue, asking if Sibora had returned to Italy. This question seemed strange to her, especially against the backdrop of their separation. Sibora had repeatedly tried to end the relationship with Marco. In 2013, she even returned to her mother's house in Italy, determined to leave everything behind. At that time, she admitted that she no longer saw any point in the relationship. Marco, however, was not deterred. He appeared at her house, assured Sibora that he would change, and even proposed marriage. Sibora, tired of arguing, once again gave in to his promises, but soon it happened again. Jealousy, control, and violence began to destroy her life again. One day, as she confessed to her mother that she literally had to disappear if she wanted to leave him forever, as Marco would otherwise never leave her alone. In the following months, Sibora came to Italy more frequently, presumably because her residence permit in Spain had expired. Elizabeth noticed that her daughter seemed increasingly frightened, but Sibora rarely provided details. She only said that she was trying to find a way out of this situation. In June 2014, Sibora moved into a new apartment and tried to make a new start. She told her mother that she would not return to Marco. For a short time, this gave her a feeling of freedom, but the fear for her safety remained. When Marco announced that Sibora had left, leaving all her belongings behind, the family immediately realized that this was not her way. She would never give up the bond with her loved ones, especially her mother and brothers. Now the family was in anxious anticipation. They hoped that Sibora had indeed decided to go underground to finally free herself from Marco's control. But the contradictory versions of events and the absence of any news from her raised more and more questions. In 2015, the investigation into Sibora Gagani's disappearance, despite the efforts of her family and the police, was still not closed. Elizabeth, her mother, was the initiator of an official appeal to the law enforcement authorities. She insisted that Marco, Sibora's former partner, might have something to do with her disappearance, as he was the last person to see her before she vanished. His behavior, however, raised more and more questions. When questioned, Marco repeated his version. Sibora had allegedly left the house after an argument, taking only a few things. Her personal belongings, including clothes and documents, however, remained in the house, which seemed strange. Despite his claims, Marco did not report her missing to the police. He claimed he had tried to find Sibora on his own by printing flyers and putting them up in the neighborhood where they lived. He also made various assumptions about her whereabouts. She might have gone to Argentina, or she was seen with an unknown man with whom there was allegedly a conflict. These statements, however, were contradictory and not supported by facts. Elizabeth, who did not trust Marco, made her own efforts to find her daughter. She contacted the media and a special organization that disseminated information about missing persons. Pictures of Sibora and appeals for help appeared in Italian and Spanish newspapers. Nevertheless, no new leads were found. While Sibora's family continued to fight for her fate, Marco lived a life that looked completely normal to outsiders. He changed his appearance. He shaved his hair and grew a beard. He tried not to draw too much attention to himself, but his behavior raised questions. During this time, he started new relationships, but both affairs ended with the women complaining about his aggressiveness. Nevertheless, he continued to live in Spain, went to the gym regularly, and joined a shooting club, which alarmed those familiar with his past. Sibora's family did not give up the search. Elizabeth repeatedly appealed to the police to intensify the investigation. At the same time, law enforcement officers began to review the case files to find new clues. They checked Marco's statement, which seemed contradictory from the beginning. The statement that Sibora had left the house with suitcases contradicted his statement. She left the house without her belongings. In addition, the question arose as to why he had not tried to involve the police immediately after her disappearance. In the meantime, public attention to Sibora's case, despite her family's efforts, gradually waned. Marco, who remained in Spain, seemed to get used to life after her disappearance. To his neighbors, he seemed like a friendly man who played sports and socialized with his fellow human beings. His former relationship with Sibora and the complaints of his new partners, however, continued to cast a shadow on his image. While Sibora's family hoped for news, the investigation stalled further. Law enforcement agencies began to expand the investigation, also consulting international databases for missing persons. But even that yielded no results, and for Sibora's relatives, the uncertainty remained the hardest to bear. In 2023, Marco had managed to completely change his life. At first glance, he lived with a new partner named Paula, and they had a child together. But behind the facade of this new life, the same problems that had haunted him for years were hidden. The relationship with Paula could not be described as stable. Again and again, she told people close to her that she was physically abused by Marco. He, in turn, could not find work, which only worsened the situation. When Marco worked in a pizzeria, he met Victor Melina, the owner of the restaurant, who later offered him and Paula a job. Victor also rented the couple a small apartment, hoping to improve their difficult financial situation. In contrast to Marco, Paula quickly gained trust and respect at work. Victor and his sister Victoria, who also worked at the restaurant, became not only employers but also supported her. Over time, Victoria learned more about the complexity of Paula and Marco's relationship. After an incident, she openly advised Paula to go to the police. In her opinion, Marco was becoming increasingly aggressive at work and also offered no support at home. One day, an incident occurred in the restaurant that left Victor speechless. The door to the staff toilet was broken. Victoria learned that Marco had done this, accusing her of allegedly using the room for meetings with colleagues. Marco was then relocated to another place under Victor's supervision. Despite her hard work and her attempts to give the impression of a normal life, Paula could not hide the complexity of her situation. Her trust in Victoria allowed her to reveal further details from her life. She admitted that she only continued to live with Marco because this was the only way to regain custody of her children, who had been taken away by the authorities due to illegal substances found in the house. The substances belonged to Marco, but the consequences affected the entire family. For Paula, it became a personal tragedy. Her main goal was to save enough money to separate from Marco and regain the rights to the children. In the meantime, Marco's situation worsened more and more. He often complained to Victor about his poor financial situation and claimed that he only continued to work for the sake of his family. But neither his actions nor his behavior confirmed this. His aggressiveness at work and his inability to get along with his colleagues led Victor to seriously question whether he should continue to work with him. At the same time, Victoria, who saw how difficult Paula's situation was, tried to convince her not to tolerate violence. Since Paula feared for her safety, she preferred not to engage in open conflict. She said that Marco had once hit and kicked her 4 times, but played down the severity of the incident. For Victoria and Victor, this was confirmation that her situation required intervention. On Tuesday, May 16, 2023, Paula spent her day off in high spirits, making plans for the evening. She told her colleagues that she wanted to relax and spend her time in a relaxing and rewarding way. The next day, May 17, Victoria expected her colleague and friend and wanted to know how her evening had gone. But events began to unfold differently. On the morning of May 17, loud shouting broke out in the apartment Paula shared with Marco at around 11:30 a.m. This was nothing unusual. Arguments between the two were frequent. This time, however, it sounded much more serious. Paula's voice was clearly audible. She called for help. The screams were so loud that Victor, Paula's landlord and employer, heard them. Together with another restaurant employee, he rushed to the scene. When they reached the apartment door, the men began to knock and loudly ask what was wrong. A soft sobbing could be heard from inside the apartment, which then fell silent. After a few seconds, Marco opened the door. His voice was calm and he assured them that everything was fine. According to him, Paula had allegedly just gone to bed and calmed down. However, her voice could no longer be heard, which made Victor very suspicious. Adding to the problem was that Marco had been fired by Victor from the restaurant only a few days earlier, after a series of incidents, including a missing kitchen knife. Marco's dismissal was the last straw, as Victor no longer trusted him and wanted to avoid possible conflicts. But now Marco is at the center of a new, disturbing incident. In the meantime, Victor, with the key in hand, went back into the house and tried to get in to find out what had happened. Paula's body lay on the floor in one of the rooms with numerous stab wounds. Her clothes were soaked in blood, and it was clear that death had occurred hours earlier. The police immediately called forensic experts to collect evidence and began searching for Marco, who had by then fled. Paula's body was sent for forensic examination to determine the exact cause of death, and investigators began searching for the suspect. Marco was arrested a few hours later in a local cafe. He sat quietly at a table as if nothing had happened and offered no resistance during the arrest. On May 20, 2023, 3 days after Paula's tragic murder, Marco appeared in court. He was charged with the crime, which was committed against the background of gender-based violence, and it was ordered that he undergo a psychiatric evaluation and a test for illegal substances. The court ordered that he be held in pretrial detention without bail. At the hearing, Marco exercised his right to remain silent. Apart from answering questions from his lawyer, he did not mention the disappearance of Sibora, which he had already mentioned earlier in the day. However, it was that name that once again came into the spotlight. It turned out that even before the hearing on May 17, the day of the crime, during the interrogation at the police station, Marco suddenly said he wanted to make a confession in connection with Sibora's case. He said that he had killed her during an argument with Sibora, and had hidden her body in the apartment where they lived together in 2014. Marco even offered to show the exact location where he believed the body was located. Despite his confession, law enforcement authorities decided to postpone their review and focus on Paula's murder case. For Sibora's mother, Elisabetha, the news about Marco and his confession in her daughter's case was a new blow. For 9 years, she had tried to get the investigation reopened, believing that Sibora's disappearance was connected to her partner. After Marco's confession, Sibora Gagani's case was reopened. Investigators wanted to verify his claim and began an examination of the apartment where the two lived in 2014. In early June 2023, Spanish investigators working on the Sibora Gagani case focused on a detailed analysis of the building's floor plan where she had once lived with Marco. A thorough inspection of the apartment that formerly belonged to the couple yielded no results, but a review of the building documents revealed a discrepancy between the actual floor plan of the apartment and the construction plans. This discovery drew their attention to a neighboring twin apartment on the same floor. Attention was drawn to a large room that, according to the plans, should have been in the bedroom of the investigated apartment but was actually missing. With permission, investigators opened the wall in the neighboring apartment in June. Behind it, they found a large wooden box filled with lime. In the box, the police found the first piece of evidence: a plastic bag with a knife covered in dried blood and personal items presumably belonging to Sibora. Among the finds was also a bouquet of withered flowers lying on several plastic bags. In one of the bags, a hiking sleeping bag was found, in which human remains were discovered. The body was sent for forensic examination to determine identity and cause of death. Investigators noted tattoos that matched the description of Sibora in the missing person report. To obtain final confirmation, Spanish authorities asked her family in Italy to provide DNA samples. On June 10, police officers arrived at the home of Elisabetha, Sibora's mother, to take a saliva sample from her. The results of the analysis confirmed the remains indeed belonged to Sibora Gagani. Within a week of the discovery in Spain, new details about Marco's actions came to light. During interrogations, he claimed he had used acid to dispose of the body. These claims, however, could not be confirmed. Investigators noted that Marco repeatedly changed his statements. His confessions, made after his arrest for Paula's murder, led to the reopening of the Sibora investigation. In the meantime, investigators continued to work on clarifying the exact circumstances of her death. For Elisabetha, the news that Sibora's body had been found was a shock. 9 years of uncertainty had robbed her of hope, but she continued to wait for news from her daughter. Over the years, her life changed. Sibora's father died of an illness without ever knowing the truth about her fate, and Elisabetha's only joy was the birth of a grandson through her son. After the identity of the remains was officially confirmed, Elisabetha remembered that she had gone to the police hoping that her daughter's case would be solved. These efforts had now led to a result which, however, represented a bitter relief. In parallel, experts continued to analyze the evidence found at the discovery site of the body. A knife found in a bag was sent for forensic examination to search for biological traces that could point to Marco. At the same time, Spanish investigators worked with their Italian colleagues to complete the investigative file on Sibora's disappearance. Concurrently, the investigation into Paula's murder case continued, in which Marco was already the main suspect. Despite all the evidence and the fact that Marco himself had confessed to the massacre of his ex-girlfriend, and even indicated the location where the body was hidden, he subsequently refused to admit his guilt in the Sibora case. His lawyer insisted that his client's statements about the location of the body had been made under duress and could not be used against him. Investigators, however, believed that the evidence found in the box, including Sibora's personal belongings, was sufficient grounds for further charges. In January 2024, months after the discovery of Sibora's remains, her family finally had the opportunity to send her on her last journey. After the completion of the forensic examinations, the body was handed over to her relatives for burial. The ceremony took place in Italy, where Sibora's friends and family could say goodbye to her. In her memory, air balloons with messages symbolizing hope and farewell were released into the sky. At this point, the trial against Marco, who was accused of Paula's murder, was in focus. At a hearing on January 30, 2024, he handed the court a 17-page handwritten letter in which he pleaded guilty, but with numerous reservations. He claimed that the conflict between them was due to frequent arguments over a debt of euros 50 and his infidelity. According to Marco, he defended himself too strongly during the argument, which led to the tragedy. The investigation, however, revealed that the wounds on Paula's body were on her back, which raised doubts about his words of self-defense. Despite his confession, Marco was not willing to talk in detail about the Sibora case. He merely confirmed that he had wrapped her body in bags, hidden it in a wooden box, covered it with flowers, covered it with lime, and bricked it up. He denied any involvement in her death and tried to justify his actions with fear of the circumstances. During the trial, Marco suddenly changed his statement about Sibora's death and offered a new version. He stated that the cause of her death was the Albanian mafia with whom he was allegedly connected due to debts. According to him, he had borrowed euros to open a brothel, but the money had been stolen. When he did not repay the debts, 4 men came to his house, one of whom killed Sibora during an argument. Marco claimed he was forced under threat to his life to dispose of the body to avoid further consequences. This version raised doubts among investigators, as Marco had previously changed his statement. The investigation revealed that since his arrest in May after Paula's murder, he had confused investigators with lies. His claims about the mafia also did not match any of the evidence collected. The cause of Sibora's death was determined after the autopsy. Multiple stab wounds, which despite the condition of the body clearly indicated a violent crime. Sibora's family received confirmation of her death years after she was reported missing. Elizabeth, her mother, said she had lived with the hope of finding out the truth in recent years, even though her father could never experience this moment. In May 2024, Paula's trial was not yet concluded. The court ordered jury proceedings. The case of Sibora Gagani was reopened but not yet heard. Investigators continued to review Marco's statements, including his claim of involvement with the mafia, and awaited new proceedings. The story of Sibora Gagani and Paula shows how destructive relationships built on violence and manipulation can have tragic consequences. Sibora, who dreamed of the future, and Paula, who tried to regain control of her life, were both victimized by the same man. Their fates show how important it is to recognize the signs of violence in time and intervene to prevent further tragedies. If you liked the video, feel free to give it a like. That helps a lot with dissemination. Also, leave a comment to support the channel and recommend the video further. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new videos. Thanks for watching and take care.